Picture a kingdom shimmering with gold, led by a man whose wisdom was so profound it drew queens and kings from across the world just to hear him speak. This is the story of King Solomon, the son of David, a ruler whose life began with divine favor and ended in haunting regret. Welcome to the Untold Scriptures, where we dive into the Bible's stories not just to uncover history, but to see the reflection of our own hearts. Today, we're walking through the rise, the fall, and the final days of Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived. His journey isn't just about palaces and proverbs, it's about the quiet dangers of a heart that drifts from God. If you're ready to step into a tale that might just hold a mirror to your own life, stay with us. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Because this story could change how you see success, faith, and the choices that shape us. Let's begin. Solomon wasn't born to blend into the crowd. From the moment he entered the world as the son of David and Bathsheba, his life was marked by a divine calling. Israel wasn't just a nation, it was God's chosen people, bound by a covenant that stretched back to Abraham. David, Solomon's father, had been a warrior king, a man whose heart, despite its flaws, burned for God. When David's time came to pass the crown, it wasn't just a throne Solomon inherited, it was a sacred trust. In 1 Chronicles 22 verses 9 to 10, God declared Solomon would be a man of peace, tasked with building a house for the Lord. A mission too holy for David's battle-scarred hands. Imagine being a young man, stepping into the shadow of a legend like David, knowing your life was meant for something greater than conquest. Solomon's reign wasn't about expanding borders with swords, it was about building a legacy with wisdom. Early in his rule, something happened that would define his story. Under the quiet stars at Gibeon, God appeared to Solomon in a dream, as 1 Kings 3 verse 5 tells us, and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Stop and think about that. The creator of the universe, the one who spins galaxies and breathes life into dust, offers you anything your heart desires. What would you choose? Riches to rival empires? Power to bend nations to your will? A long life to savor it all? Solomon could have asked for anything, but his response was stunning. He didn't chase glory or gold. He bowed his heart and said, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." 1 Kings 3 verse 9. He asked for wisdom, not for his own gain, but to lead God's people with justice. Can you feel the humility in that moment? Here was a king who saw leadership as stewardship, a burden to carry for the sake of others. God was moved. In 1 Kings 3 verses 10 to 14, we read that because Solomon's request wasn't selfish, God gave him a mind sharper than any in history, a wisdom so vast it outshone every sage and philosopher. But God didn't stop there. He showered Solomon with blessings he hadn't even asked for: wealth beyond measure, honor that echoed across kingdoms, and the promise of a long life, so long as he walked faithfully. This wasn't just a coronation, it was a divine partnership, a moment where heaven and earth aligned. Solomon's early days glowed with promise. A young ruler stepping into his calling with God's favor resting on him like a crown. Have you ever started something, a job, a dream, a calling that felt so right, so God-ordained? You could almost see the future unfolding? That's where Solomon stood, his heart open, his purpose clear. He wasn't just ruling a kingdom, he was living a covenant. But here's where we pause. A beginning this bright casts a long shadow. Solomon's story starts with divine favor, but as we'll see, even the greatest gifts can become burdens if they're not guarded with obedience. What happens when a man who knows God's voice begins to listen to others? Let's keep walking, because Solomon's wisdom was about to be tested, and his heart was about to be revealed. Solomon's wisdom wasn't just a gift, it was a tool, sharp and practical, cutting through the chaos of human hearts. One of the most famous moments of his early reign, found in 1 Kings 3 verses 16 to 28, shows it in action. Two women stood before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same child. Picture the scene, a crowded court, emotions raw, two mothers torn by grief and desperation. One baby, One truth and a king tasked with finding it. This wasn't a simple dispute. It demanded discernment beyond human ability. Solomon listened, his eyes searching their faces, his mind guided by the wisdom God had poured into him. Then he spoke, and his words stunned the room. "Bring me a sword. Divide the child in two and give half to each." The air must have gone still. Was the king mad? But Solomon wasn't cruel, he was cunning. He knew the true mother's heart would reveal itself. And it did. One woman cried out, begging him to spare the child and give it to the other. Her love was sacrificial, selfless, undeniable. The other, cold and indifferent, agreed to the division. In that moment, Solomon's wisdom sliced through the chaos, revealing truth without spilling blood. The people of Israel stood in awe, whispering, only God could grant such insight. From that day, Solomon's name began to spread. His wisdom wasn't confined to courtrooms, it shaped a nation. In 1 Kings 4 verses 29 to 30, we're told God gave Solomon very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. His mind was a treasury, penning 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs, 1 Kings 4:32. He explored creation, leadership, and the human heart, his words carrying divine weight. Have you ever read a verse from Proverbs and felt it speak straight to your soul? Many of those came from Solomon, a man whose mind was in tune with the Creator. His fame crossed borders, reaching kings and queens who marveled at his insight. One visitor, the Queen of Sheba, couldn't resist testing the legend herself. She traveled across deserts, her caravan heavy with gold and spices, her mind brimming with questions meant to stump even the wisest. When she stood before Solomon, as 1 Kings 10 verses 6 to 7 records, she was speechless. "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true," she said. "But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me." Can you imagine what it takes to leave a queen in awe? This wasn't just intellect. It was God's presence radiating through Solomon, a testament to the covenant between Israel and its God. But let's hold that thought for a moment. Solomon's wisdom made him a beacon, drawing the world to Jerusalem. Yet wisdom alone doesn't anchor a soul. Even the brightest light can flicker if it's not rooted in devotion. As we move deeper, we'll see how Solomon's reign, radiant with glory, began to cast shadows of compromise. What happens when the gifts meant to honor God start pulling a heart away from him? Let's keep going, because the next chapter of Solomon's story holds a truth we can't ignore. Solomon's reign wasn't just about wisdom, it was about splendor. Under his leadership, Israel became a wonder of the ancient world, a kingdom that shimmered with peace and prosperity. In 1 Kings 10 verses 23 to 24, we read, "King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with him to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart." Picture it. Rulers from distant lands, their entourages trailing, crossing seas and deserts to sit at Solomon's feet. His court was a spectacle of order and beauty, a living testimony to God's favor. His wealth was staggering, 666 talents of gold, over 25 tons, flowed into his treasury yearly, 1 Kings 10 verse 14. His trade routes linked Egypt to Mesopotamia, his fleets sailed the seas, returning with gold, silver, ivory, and exotic creatures, 1 Kings 10 verse 22. His throne, carved from ivory and overlaid with gold, was guarded by 12 lions, a symbol of unmatched authority, 1 Kings 10 verses 18 to 20. Even his goblets were pure gold, silver was too common for his table, 1 Kings 10 verse 21. This wasn't just wealth, it was a statement. Solomon's kingdom was the envy of the world. Yet among all his achievements, one stood above the rest, the temple in Jerusalem. David had dreamed of building it, but God reserved that honor for Solomon. In 1 Kings 6, we see it described, a masterpiece of divine design. Cedar from Lebanon filled its halls, gold covered its walls, and every detail reflected heavenly order. It took 7 years to complete, a number symbolizing perfection. When it was finished, Solomon gathered the nation to dedicate it. In 1 Kings 8 verses 10 to 11. As the Ark of the Covenant was placed in the most holy place, a cloud filled the temple, so overwhelming the priests couldn't continue their service. God's glory had descended. Solomon fell to his knees, lifting a prayer that still echoes, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way." 1 Kings 8 verse 23. This was Solomon at his peak, not in wealth or power, but in spiritual surrender. Have you ever felt God's presence so strongly it changed you? That's what Solomon experienced, standing in the shadow of God's glory. But here's the question we can't escape. Can blessings so vast become burdens? Solomon had wisdom, wealth, and God's presence. Yet, as we'll see, even the greatest gifts can turn heavy if they're not held with humility. The temple was a triumph, but the next part of Solomon's story reveals cracks forming beneath the gold. Let's keep walking. Because what happens next will challenge everything we think about success and faithfulness. The temple was Solomon's greatest legacy, but his reign was filled with wonders. His palace, the house of the forest of Lebanon, gleamed with cedar and gold. His trade networks brought treasures from across the world, making Jerusalem a hub of wealth and culture. He built cities, fortified walls, and chariot garrisons, turning Israel into a powerhouse. But beneath this golden age, something was shifting. Success, when unguarded, can be as dangerous as failure. In 1 Kings 11, 1-2, we see the first crack. King Solomon loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. God had warned in Deuteronomy 7, 3-4 not to intermarry with these nations, for their gods would lead Israel astray. Solomon, the wisest man alive, knew this. Yet he took 700 wives and 300 concubines, many from these forbidden nations. Why would a man so wise ignore God's command? Was it diplomacy, securing alliances through marriage? Was it desire, a heart swayed by beauty? Or was it pride, believing he could bend the rules without consequence? Whatever the reason, these relationships weren't just personal, they were spiritual. His wives brought their gods, and slowly, Solomon's heart began to drift. In 1 Kings 11 verse 4, we read, "As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been." This wasn't a sudden fall, it was a quiet slide. The king who prayed for God's presence in the temple now built altars to Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Molech, gods whose worship included horrors like child sacrifice. 1 Kings 11 verses 5-8. Can you feel the tragedy? The man who stood in God's glory now knelt before idols carved by human hands. Let's pause here. Have you ever made a choice you knew was wrong, but it felt justified in the moment? A small compromise, a step off the path? Solomon's story shows us how easily a heart can wander when it listens to voices other than God's. His fall wasn't about losing wisdom, it was about losing devotion. As we move forward, we'll see how God responded to this betrayal and what it meant for Solomon's legacy. God's love for Solomon was deep, but his holiness demanded justice. Twice, he had appeared to him, once at Gibeon, offering anything he desired, and again in Jerusalem, affirming his covenant. 1 Kings 9 verse 2. God had warned clearly, "If you turn away from me and serve other gods, I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them." 1 Kings 9 verses 6-7. Solomon knew the stakes, yet he chose to ignore them. In 1 Kings 11 verses 9-10 we read, "The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice." Twice. How many would give anything for a single encounter with God, yet Solomon, visited twice, turned away? It's a reminder that even divine moments can't protect a heart that chooses to wander. God's response was firm but measured. In 1 Kings 11 verse 11, he declared, "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." The kingdom Solomon had built would fracture, not in his lifetime, but in his sons. A mercy for David's sake. 1 Kings 11 verses 12 to 13. A prophet named Ahijah met Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, and tore his cloak into 12 pieces, giving him 10 and declaring that God would give him 10 tribes. 1 Kings 11 verses 29 to 31. The kingdom, once unified, was now destined to split. Solomon's choices didn't just affect him. They reshaped a nation. Have you ever considered how your decisions ripple beyond you, touching those you love, those who follow you? Solomon's divided heart led to a divided kingdom. As we continue, we'll see how he grappled with the emptiness of his choices and what he left behind for us. Solomon's life, once a beacon of divine favor, now stood as a warning. The man who had everything: wisdom, wealth, power, built altars to gods that demanded abomination. The temple, where God's glory once dwelt, was overshadowed by high places where idols were worshipped. How does a heart that burned for God grow cold? It's rarely a single leap. It's a slow drift, a series of choices that pull you further from truth. Solomon's marriages, meant to secure alliances, became chains binding his spirit. His wealth, once a sign of God's blessing, became a distraction dulling his devotion. In Ecclesiastes 2 verses 10 to 11, he reflects, "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind." This wasn't a young king full of promise. It was a man wrestling with regret. Solomon's wisdom hadn't failed. He still saw the world clearly, but his heart had wandered. He had written in Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Yet he leaned on his own desires, his alliances, his strength. The irony cuts deep. The man who taught others to fear God forgot to fear him himself. Have you ever known what's right but chosen otherwise? Solomon's story is a mirror, showing how easily we can drift if we're not anchored in God. As we near his final days, we'll see how he faced this emptiness, searching for meaning in a life that had lost its center. By his final years, Solomon's glory felt like a fading dream. The man who stood in God's presence, who built a temple housing the Almighty's glory, now sat in a palace surrounded by riches that couldn't satisfy. In Ecclesiastes, he pours out his heart, not as a king commanding attention, but as a man wrestling with regret. Meaningless. Meaningless, he cries in Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2. Everything is meaningless. These aren't the words of someone who lacked success. They're the cries of someone who had it all and found it wanting. Solomon had built palaces, planted vineyards, gathered treasures. He filled his courts with music, laughter, luxury. Yet none of it filled the void in his soul. In Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10, he writes, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income." This too is meaningless. Solomon wasn't theorizing. He was confessing. He had chased wealth, pleasure, power, believing they would bring fulfillment. They didn't. His heart, once devoted to God, had been pulled by his wives, his idols, his pride. The altars he built for Ashtoreth and Molech weren't just structures. They were symbols of a heart divided. Yet even in regret, Solomon's wisdom shines. He sees the futility of his pursuits and points toward the only thing that matters. Have you ever chased something, a job, a relationship, a dream, only to find it empty? Solomon's story reminds us that nothing in this world satisfies a soul created for God. Let's see how he distills this truth in his final moments. Solomon's final days weren't filled with triumph. The man who ruled with unmatched wisdom, whose court dazzled the world, sat in quiet reflection. His palaces glittered, but his heart trembled. In Ecclesiastes, he opens his soul, revealing the cost of a life lived for self. "I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind." Ecclesiastes 1 verse 14. This wasn't despair. It was clarity. Solomon had tasted every pleasure, achieved every ambition, and still longed for the God he had drifted from. His marriages, meant to strengthen his kingdom, weakened his faith. The idols stole his devotion, piece by piece. Yet in his twilight years, his wisdom returned, not as a tool to wield, but as a lens to see his failures clearly. In Ecclesiastes 7 verse 29, he writes, "This only have I found, God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." These words carry the weight of a man who strayed but saw the truth in the end. Solomon's schemes, his alliances, idols, pleasures led him astray, but they couldn't erase the truth he once knew. As his life neared its end, he penned a final message, a beacon of hope amidst his regret. Let's hear it, because his last words are for us too. In the quiet of his final moments, Solomon wrote words that would outlive his reign, his wealth, his failures. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13 is his closing truth, forged in the fire of regret. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. These aren't the words of a king on a throne, but of a man humbled by time, stripped of illusions, awakened to the truth he had forsaken. Solomon had built a kingdom that dazzled the world, but he learned too late that only a heart devoted to God brings peace. His story is both warning and gift. He began with divine wisdom, walked in God's presence, built a temple where heaven met earth. Yet he ended in regret, his heart divided by compromises he thought he could control. In Ecclesiastes 2 verse 11, he confesses, "Nothing was gained under the sun." But in that confession, there's redemption. Solomon's failure points us to the only thing that matters, a life anchored in God. His fall asks us, what are we chasing? What altars are we building? Are we seeking the world's approval or God's? As Solomon's life closed, he sat alone, his palace silent, his heart heavy with what could have been. Yet his final words are a lifeline. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the wisdom he left, not from triumph, but from brokenness. His story isn't just about a king who fell. It's about a God who never stops calling us back. So, where does this leave you? Are you building for eternity, or just for today? Solomon's life teaches us that it's not how grand your beginning is, but how faithful your finish will be. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Untold Scriptures. If this story stirred your heart, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below, tell us, what part of Solomon's story speaks to you? Is it his wisdom, his fall, or his final call to fear God? Your support keeps this channel alive, spreading the truth of God's word. Let's learn from Solomon's fall before it becomes our own. Fear God, keep his commandments, and may your finish be far greater than your beginning. God bless you.